This is a small group that's going to talk about what it means to have relationships in this complex world. Now, what I want is immediately to understand if people can see and hear me, and then I'll scroll up and give you questions that were left before. So, in such a small group, there's more onus on you to let me know what's up. The good news is that I'm going to be able to take, it's probably going to be a short Q&A. I'm going to be able to take a lot more of your questions because the world's on fire and we're talking about love life. But this is an important topic, and I'm going to do another one, probably on friendship. Now, it's a bit silly what I'm doing now because I've just done this last minute. And what's interesting is that we've got a small number of people who are clearly going to be interested in this topic. And they should have been given a fair warning ahead of time. Well, don't worry if you've missed this. There's going to be more like this. So let's go up and rock and roll. Now, it's very important that whatever I say in response to whatever you've written above is not going to be therapeutic. But it's going to come from two perspectives. I mean, the perspective, number one perspective is going to be the perspective of me as a social commentator and political philosopher, observing what's going on out there in our society. And the second perspective is going to be that I've been doing self-development consulting for a long time, in tiny doses, but for a long time. And that standardly breaks down into two: aesthetic self-development for people involved in the arts, and more recently, as you can imagine, much more civic and political self-development, people self-developing in their relationship with politics as it impacts their professional, their personal life. So I think a lot about getting people from A to B. And that's the second perspective. So let's rock and roll and see what's going on. Pauli, I'm going to assume you're male. I've been single for 2 decades, right? I never became black-pilled or depressed, but I believe my emotional state has atrophied. How do I cope with chronic loneliness and maintain one's mental health? So you can imagine this is going to be a generic comment on somebody abstractly in that predicament rather than a comment directly to you, Pauli, for obvious reasons, because we're only dealing with abstract information. It's very important that there is such a thing as loss in life when we don't have things we want. There is also such a thing as the loss of the sense of loss in life. And that's when we want something, can't have it, and then end up thinking that we think that we don't need it anyway. So there's possibility for a kind of despair of shrunken needs. And so it's very important that one is clear about avoiding this problem of the loss of the sense of loss, right? And being realistic about what one's losing and trying to see it as it is, not less than it is and not greater than it is. And so I suppose then a question might be, what does it mean to keep needing, or to start needing in a new way? I mean, you say, I have atrophied. And starting needing in a new way means admitting, first of all, the reality of other people, admitting the uncontrollability of other people, and our dependence on them, but also understanding their dependence on us. So, how do I explore what it means to want something very much, having not had it, without denying those wants that have long not been realized? Tom, hi Vlad, living in East London with a Polish partner and child, recently diagnosed with MS. It's a bomb. Relationship turbulence, bomb. Plan to move to Poland, which could bring more bombs, and I feel surrounded. I'm so sorry about the MS diagnosis. I don't know what kind of MS you have, which is a big part of what would frame our thinking here. So you've just got a problem of containment, right? You've got trying to hold your life, bits of your life together. These things are just falling through. You're going like this, and things are falling through this gap and that gap and this gap and that gap. And so how do you create a space in your life where you don't feel under attack? And you might feel, I can't. Between the health, between the kids, between the immigration, I don't have space to see a friend who'll support me. I don't have space or money to do therapy. The problem is that when you've got a problem of containment and everything is falling through your fingers, you can no longer distinguish between the objects that are assailing you. It feels like a porridge that's just coming your way, or like you're standing and the elements are just, there's this just aggressive rain flying into your face. And you can no longer distinguish what's what. It's just a set of sort of bad objects flying, all mixed. And so to begin containing them, you have to begin separating them out into what they are. And the categories won't necessarily be relationship, Poland, health, because each could contain different multitudes within them. But the point is, nevertheless, that you have to begin breaking the pattern, if you can, of all of these things morphing into one big undifferentiable sort of assault on you, something that you can't hold. And I bet you're dreaming. If you are dreaming, are you dreaming uncontainable dreams? A room where the ceiling doesn't hold, a bike where the wheels break, right? I bet you're having dreams like that. So there's got to be some kind of differentiation of all of these objects that are coming your way. And that means some kind of injection of oxygen into your life where you can, for a short time, take a breath and feel that all of these things are not just rolled into one. Mark, I've had a hard time with my feelings when I'm in a relationship. I always find something better and can't settle with one person. It causes me tremendous anxiety and guilt because I feel I'm with the wrong person and wasting time for her and for me. I want to be monogamous, but I find it almost impossible due to the anxiety I feel. I really don't know what I should do or try to do next. It feels like I find a lot of faults in the other person in my head, even though I don't want to. thinks in advance, male, 25 to 30. So you're not able to hold the other person as a whole. You can only hold them as a kind of fantasy version of them. And your mind protects yourself from holding them as a whole by creating this situation where you hold a fantasy version of them. Because holding them as a whole triggers persecutory anxiety in you because you can't hold yourself. I mean, I'm answering an abstract version of you, not you, but there are likely to be significant overlaps. So this is about you, and this is about acceptance of yourself, which will then allow you to tolerate the kind of ambivalence that goes with reality, and the kind of love that goes with frustration and imperfection and exploration and surprise and discovery, without uncertainty and imperfection and complexity feeling like it's a kind of catastrophe or something you have to face yourself away from. So normally, the majority of people in the predicament that you are in will not naturally fix this. But in many cases, I would say maybe even in the majority of cases, with the right kind of therapy and support over, let's say, half a decade, this is fixable. You're also lucky you're male in that age. You've got all the time in the world. So basically your task is, how do I, by my mid to late 30s, not feel this, right? And what's scary is that you don't see any way to get to that place at the moment, but it's about new possibilities becoming evident that feel like possibilities you can't touch now. And so that's also very important. Don't ask of yourself to do something you can't yet do. You can't start a relationship tomorrow and hold the other person. You'll still continue holding a fantasy version of them. But your task is to make sure that that's not the case in 7 years, right? Dan Kim, what are your thoughts on the ethics of having children? Many people today think it's unethical. So we can't apply some kind of utilitarian calculus to an intensely psychologically complex decision like whether to have or not to have children. So we've got a set of planetary crises all converging on a kind of a core that is the climate crisis, which is going to trigger wars, migrations on a scale we haven't seen. And we are going to have problems of the kind we haven't seen, including in the West, with supply chains. We are in a world in which we've got a lot of humans. We don't have a way of supporting all of them as well as we'd like. And we've got, for the first time in the history of the West, a situation where the lives of the future generations will be better and worse than ours in different dimensions, but won't be clearly cumulatively better. And that's a cultural shock to us, right? People in the 50s and 60s thought the next generation would be better off. The generation after that thought the next generation would be better off. That's no longer the case. So here is what I would say. That's the first thing I'm gesturing at, is that you can't just do some kind of utilitarian calculus and say that I'm going to reduce the stress on the climate by bringing in fewer people into the world. You would need to be a very rare kind of person for whom it would be right to just do that kind of read-off. In other words, most people who do that read-off do it unhealthily or pathologically or narcissistically. In other words, don't think that that's just a purely healthy and benign enterprise. One way of being a narcissist is to not have children to save the planet. Now, there are going to be a very small minority of people who can, in a healthy and non-pathological way, say, yes, I'm not going to have children because doing so would stress our planetary demands and so on, and therefore that's going to be my decision. But you need to be a very special kind of person to have a healthy relationship with that kind of decision. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say, that which is the thing that people think about most in these waters, is that, isn't it going to be really tough for my children? And my answer is, it depends. I am not a massive catastrophist about Western children. So it depends where you are in the world, right? Western children, who are going to be, let's say, born next year. In 2047, they're going to be 20. In 57, they're going to be 30. Are they going to see climate impacts in the West and climate-mediated societal transformation, maybe even climate-mediated democratic collapse of the kind that you haven't seen? Maybe. Yeah. Well, on democratic collapse, maybe. On climate impacts, definitely. But they're not going to live in some kind of apocalyptic society. They're going to go to the theater. They're going to do online dating. They're going to play sports. They're going to have different jobs. They're going to have, fetishes about coffee or baking bread. You're not going to be bringing children into some kind of apocalypse. It's just going to be no longer true that their lives are going to be cumulatively better than the lives of previous generations. That's about it. So I wouldn't catastrophize this, right? There are some parts of the world, in the West too, where it'll be difficult. You have to be very serious about wildfires in Greece or in California, other parts of Southern Europe, and so on. You have to be serious about other impacts. You don't want your kids in 20 years buying property next to the ocean. But you've got to have a sense of perspective about this. Their lives in some ways are going to be better than the lives of any human beings who've lived before. In other ways, they will be worse than the lives of humans who have recently lived, but not worse than the lives of humans who've been around across history. So I think that's what I would say. Jan, how does one tackle self-loathing and narcissism as a man? As you once said, no sophisticated woman will put up with it. What a sophisticated woman would want is a real man, not a man who is doing performance and theatricity. Because a man like that will never make a real woman feel safe. So, in a man who's got some narcissistic traits that might be short of NPD, it's important to be transparent about them with oneself. It's important to work on them. it's important to find the right kind of therapy that works for one. It's important to remember that in self-aggrandizement and in self-loathing, you're doing, in one sense, the same thing. The inner drama is all about putting you at the center. And so, there's a fantasy of being exceptional that drives both the self-aggrandizement and the self-loathing. And so what a sophisticated woman needs is just contact with the real person. And it's about, how close can one get to accepting the extraordinary beauty of ordinariness, right? I'm going to call this a job done on scrollifications. Let's scroll down a little bit. Have you seen, Alex is asking, Louis Theroux's Manosphere? No, when I see Louis' Manosphere, I'm going to do a video about it. I think it's probably culturally an important film, I think. So I'd be delighted. I'm going to be very delighted to do a reaction to it. Okay, so we've done it. Daniel, my wife has a good deal of anxiety dealing with our wild kiddos and her managerial work. We spread tasks pretty evenly. Can you recommend coping skills? So I believe in a kind of a minimal dose of oxygen in the relationship. Unless the relationship has a minimal dose of oxygen whereby the partners have a little bit of quality time together, it's very, very, very difficult to cope with anything. That might mean, a 4-day retreat once every 3 to 6 months where you reconnect. It might mean creating space for the relationship for 30 minutes once a week. It's very important also that you can't deal with any issues unless it's the right time. That is one of the principles of overwhelmed relationships, that bringing something up but there's no space to process it because it's 7 a.m. and the kiddies are going crazy and you need to get them to school and so on. Bringing something up important at that point is unfair. It's a kind of an injustice against the relationship because the relationship has no capacity to process it. So oxygen, not bringing things up when there is no space to process them, and then understanding that there are 3 entities in the relationship. There is person A, there is person B, and there is entity C, which is the relationship itself. And the relationship itself is like some kind of thing in your garden, which can be sort of dried up, can need some watering, could need some management. So all of all of these are basics. I suppose if there's a thread that's running through them, it's how close is the couple to sort of running aground and just not having enough oxygen. And if that's the case, you need to inject something as an emergency measure, because that's a precondition for being able to hold and cope with everything else. Rascally Vlad. Oh, hang on. Daradex is saying, I only care about Pigton. Why are you keeping it hostage? I'm not. Pigton is over there, proudly sitting on my bookshelf with Julie Yofi's book below Pigton, actually, and I haven't read it yet because I virtually cannot read, although I can listen to audiobooks with my current health situation. Hi, Vlad. in a culturally diverse landscape, how does one define a minimal set of shared values when looking for a partner to raise children with? Um, it's very important to prepare um, for the possibility of being surprised um, in the relationship. Um, but your question about what does it mean to have too great a divergence of values is in part a conversation about the non-negotiable in the relationship. And the non-negotiable in the relationship is um, what it is that will not be done. Um, who is to do, who is not to do what and how and when and under what circumstances. What are the things that are not going to be part of the relationship? And then you can negotiate about what's non-negotiable. So it might be that you are not going to be okay with a Trump voter. But the reality is, you probably won't be a great match with a Trump voter anyway, independently of the political reasons, you see? So I am myself aware that political polarization is playing all kinds of games with relationships. But at the same time, there's also a risk of overestimating that, in part because um, if you're mismatched around voting for Trump versus Bernie or whatever, the likelihood is you're going to be mismatched for other reasons that are going to keep you apart before you get to that. I'd also say it is very important to think about how a view sits in somebody as much as it is to think what view it is. And that distinction can allow one actually to be with people who one would ordinarily find alien, for instance, in their political orientation. But I think that one thing you're going to struggle with is if you see reality a certain way and your partner simply doesn't see it like that, right? Let's say you think that Trump is destroying US democracy and your partner thinks that Trump's doing a pretty good job. If politics is a sufficiently large part of your life, you're really going to have a problem there. And the chances are it's also going to express itself in other dimensions, whether it's going to be just an incapacity to agree on the world you're meant to sort of mutually be reacting to. DB says Andrew Tate is not the problem, he's the symptom. Making a film about people like him is like talking about American food by going on into McDonald's and Burger King. Well, I'm going to watch the Manosphere. I'm going to react to it. I'm not sure that's necessarily a fair criticism, because we can learn a lot from the most intensified and sort of perverse forms of something. But anyway, these forms are out there. They're part of our society. They make an impact, so that they're worth exploring just for that reason. Vlad, Armory Cat, how is a man who is leaning more on the feminine side, even somewhat androgynous, go about dating women? It seems like women who are romantically and sexually attracted to this are fairly rare. Women who are attracted to feminine men are not rare. Women who are attracted to what you describe as androgynous, somewhat androgynous, maybe are more rare. The most important thing here for you is just simply self-knowledge. What women want is somebody who isn't lost in themselves. Also, of course, it's a very important question for you whether you are neurodiverse, right? If you're autistic, it's much more a version of normal in the autistic context to be a little bit, um, uh, y- you know, a little bit abstracted away from a a kind of a direct access to what you would describe as a masculine or a feminine psychology. Um, so that's anyway a version of normal if that's where it's coming from for you. And we're much more open than we've ever been about that in our society, and much more inclusive, but not inclusive enough of neurodiverse people. Um, so you're going to have to start with uh, self knowledge, um, because don't forget, um, having an unusual way of masculinity and femininity sitting in you is not lack of knowledge about yourself. It's knowledge about the fact that you are um, a bit unusual in a particular way. The thing that's really going to muck you up is if if you're seen as somebody who doesn't know what they are, right? But knowing what you are is very powerful, is very compelling. So that's a distinction that I think is probably relevant to your prospects of success, and your prospects also to stabilizing a sense of what you want and what you're compatible with, right? Um, and don't forget that a healthy coupling, a healthy pairing, is um, all about exploration and a series of surprises about what works and what is possible. The rather sort of geeky, techie, systematized, manosphere driven conception of dating is very, very false in our culture, which is, I am ABC, I want DEF, I'm going to go out to get it as though I want to catch a particular kind of carp and I'm fishing. It's not how it works. Um, it's about openness, it's about receptivity, and it's about also giving time and being open to being surprised. I can't talk about Iran in this conversation because it'll look even more wild if I do. All right. We've gone half an hour. Let's see if we can squeeze another half an hour. The problem with this kind of live is that it normally needs a warning for people who have personal questions to join up. And I just did this last minute. So I'm already impressed with how many we've got. Should one marry in Dubai the next few weeks? Yeah. If that's what you were going to do, then yeah. Invisible Paw, in previous chats, you mentioned that even large cities had only one good psychoanalyst. How do you find them? I'm from Toronto. So I wasn't talking about therapists. Every good city has many good therapists of different kinds. I was talking about psychoanalytic therapists. And even there, I didn't mean good, I meant great. Um, and sort of my tongue-in-cheek remark was that there's really a great psychoanalyst or two or three in London and uh, Rome and New York. But there are going to be many, many very good ones. And there are going to be many, many very good therapists. The thing you have to watch for with therapists is that it's a structurally flawed profession, like many professions, because demand is so high that the sheer number of therapists we need is higher than there could plausibly be a number of competent therapists. So getting a good therapist often means, it's going to be your second or your third or your fourth try. And some therapeutic organizations do an assessment for you where they try to match you to somebody who will work for you. That's often a very good idea. And often that works very, very well. So sometimes you will have 1 or 2 sessions that are an assessment with a therapist, and then you'll be matched with one with whom you might hopefully pair well. If you're going guerrilla style and you're just picking therapists yourself, it may need to be an exploration until you land on something that works. Sometimes you can see straight away that there is no match. Sometimes you can see that over time it'll become clear. Something else I'd say is that unfortunately, that lower end of the profession is especially bad at couples therapy. So if you're a couple seeking therapy, be very careful about landing with just a random therapist. The odds are they're going to make the situation worse, I'm afraid to say. So they need to be at least above average to stand the chance of not making the situation worse, unless you're a couple with very, very, very basic problems, like very basic problems that are almost, almost can be worked out with a little bit of sort of practical reflection about somebody needs to do that a bit differently, the other one needs to do this a bit differently, then you're good. But if you've got some deep issues, like let's say one person in the committed couple relationship has a lot of trauma, the other one doesn't, and that creates all kinds of complexities and misunderstandings, there's going to be a real problem. And the real problem that's going to happen is going to be a problem of equalization. So if we've got Bernie and Samantha, and Bernie is traumatized, then the therapist will equalize Bernie's and Samantha's remarks, even when they shouldn't. Because what will happen is that Samantha will make a non-pathological remark, Bernie will make a pathological remark, and the therapist won't be able to include in his pattern of work, that pathology is playing a part in what one of the people is saying, but not the other. It'll just be equalized, So let's take an example. Samantha says, "Why don't you consider changing jobs?" And Bernie says that hearing that just shuts him down because he feels attacked. And he can't feel or think clearly about anything for a day or two. And that therefore, can Samantha please stop attacking him by asking him that maybe he needs to explore getting a different job? The risk is that the therapist will just say, Samantha doesn't feel like she's attacking Bernie. Bernie does feel that Samantha is attacking him, and so they need to meet in the middle. And so what's the problem with this equalization? The problem with the equalization is that it's only because of Bernie's pathology that he experiences what Samantha says is an attack, and that'll get equalized out. So this very, very dangerous pattern of equalization at the lower end of couples therapy that's very important to avoid. What is my opinion on celibacy? Well, I think it's very, very important to be careful about taking extreme positions. because of the way they overlap, right? There's going to be a lot of commonalities between the psychology of a sex addict and the psychology of somebody who wants to avoid sex completely, right? Um, Often the um, sort of the, the one will be a complement in reverse to the other, even though they superficially seem like opposites. Vlad, how much damage did believe all women cause when the mere accusation of assault was enough to break an innocent man's life? Well, we're still living in a context in which women are relatively disempowered in our society, I'm afraid to say. And to that extent, it's important to be not just a theoretical, but a practical feminist. Um, does believe all X work? No, it doesn't. What works? Instead of believe, instead of I believe you, A, I hear you. B, I'm going to take your accusations very seriously and check if they are true. And I'm going to go out of my way to do that properly. Perhaps you could add another couple of conditions. And I've actually written down my own version of I believe somewhere. I've just got a brain block about it, but it's got to go in that direction. It can't be I believe. It has to be I hear you. I take you very, very seriously, and I'm committed to what you are saying being, properly checked, and people being properly held to account. Right? That's the way. That's the right thing to say here. What do you mean when you say there's a problem with men? Well, we're going to talk about it properly. I mean, very roughly, this is very simplified, but the crisis of men is a combination of two things: economic alienation, number one, and number two, cultural inarticulacy. Men not having the resources to articulate what it means to express healthy masculinity. Men feeling they don't have the cultural resources to speak as masculine men. So that's the combo. And it's a very destructive combo for men, for women, and also for our politics, because men caught up in that predicament are going to vote for anti-democratic political forces a great deal of the time, right? And so it's not just that this creates a problem whereby women age 30 to 50 say, I don't have anybody to date. And then men say, I'm unhappy, I can't express myself, and I'm alienated. It's also that our politics is impacted. Vlad, do you think that women tend to put everything in an emotional context, whereas most men tend to separate emotional parts of their lives from other parts of their lives? No, I don't. I think that the different ways in which women are feminine and men are masculine is going to be to do with different emotional properties of each. It's at the level of psychoanalytic explanation. You're not going to get away from an emotional picture. At the same time, there are clearly going to be differences, and it may be possible to generalize about those. For instance, one party being more interested in relationships on average, another party being more interested in things, right? But um, you're not quite going to get a situation where women are emotional and men are not. Do you think that the cause of less relationship formation is due to women not needing to depend financially on men? No. I mean, there's research about this. I don't participate in it, but um, I have views about this, and the answer is no. It seems women are more content being single due to better social lives. And women have clearly um, more options than they did in the past, and in the past they had more options than in the past before that past. But the problems with pairing today are to do with various kinds of cultural dislocation that we're experiencing, chief among them being this crisis of men that we've just touched upon but not elaborated on. Delicacy saying most of us here love Vlad, different types of love, but love. Yes, there's many, many different types of love. And one of the things that happens in our culture is that we underestimate what the lower levels of love is, how readily, how easily love comes into a human relationship, right? If you have a hairdresser you've been going to for, and I'm my own hairdresser, and obviously I love myself, but if you been going to a hairdresser for 10 years, um, and you've got a great relationship with them, and you just don't want to think about getting another hairdresser, and you really don't want one, and they're the only one who do what you really want, and suddenly they say, well, I'm shifting, I'm moving country. um, if you feel really happy for your hairdresser, even though you're going to be inconvenienced by them leaving, love has come into your relationship a little bit, because at the most basic level, now this is not even 1,000th of the kind of love that's possible between human beings, but it's still a kind of love, because you want something to happen for somebody, even if it is against your interest for it to happen to them. I was wondering on your view on how it's more difficult for young people to meet in person due to the loss of the third space, and there seems to be less opportunities for couples to meet organically. I think that there are certain ways, unfortunately, in which the structure of online dating hurts the thing we talked about earlier about being open to being surprised and exploration. Funnily enough, I think that online dating is easiest for people who really know themselves well and who really know what they're open to and not open to well, and who understand this importance of being open to being surprised. Um, Unfortunately, online dating can exaggerate people's pathologies around dating. Um, and can increase the degree to which people are caught up in a kind of a consumerist attitude, whereby you're kind of shopping for something that has properties 1 through to 7. And the problem is that you've got to be able to do online dating very intuitively, but only people who are pretty well put together can do that. um, it pushes you in the direction of sort of ticking boxes. So my advice with online dating would be play more. Um, if you know that you're not open to something, okay, But otherwise, jumble your categories once in a while, right? Jumble your categories for whatever it is you prefer, whether it's people's age, people's height, whatever. Jumble it around a little bit. Um, there's a lot of magical thinking in around this sort of consumerist business of I'm looking for these 7 things and here they are. Um, when in fact the person barely even knows who they are, let alone what the 7 things they're looking for are. So there is this set of structural problems that absolutely online dating introduces, and you can use online dating as a service, or you can have it use you, if you like. You can be a kind of a pawn where um, the genre, if you like, um, structures the role that you play. So you want to control it rather than having it control you. Not magenta. Hi, Vlad. I've fallen in love with a person, but it's clear that we can only be friends. How can one transform feelings that of friendship in uncertain waters? Is this possible? Am I deluded? Yes, it's possible, but it's very important that, contrary to sort of myths in our culture, the space for Sally loves Barry, but Barry doesn't love Sally back is actually much, much smaller than people think. Ultimately, it is a part of wanting to be with somebody that you have a clear sense of what a positive match it is. There is no such thing as, I really want them, but I can also understand that they don't want me back. Um, the degree to which that is possible, even though that's just a cultural story out there all the time, it's the story in the movies. And so the degree to which that's possible in a properly healthy dynamic is actually fairly limited. Because if you are properly wanting something for what they are, wanting someone for what they are, and not for some fantasy version of them, then a central part of that will be the understanding that them matching with you and you matching with them will create something wonderful objectively, right? And so you've got to get serious about this question of whether there is or isn't a match, because if there isn't a match, it should be quite easy over time to move beyond your feelings, because true feelings are not separable from the idea of there being a match, right? Otherwise, you're like somebody who wants to sort of, you know, chaperone somebody onto a tennis court who doesn't want to play tennis. Um, so being deeply attracted and in love with somebody is not separable from the idea that you must be objectively right about the special qualities of the match between you if it transpires for both parties. And for that third pillar as well, for the relationship. Um, so that's what I would say. Practically, what I recommend in your case is space. It typically takes 18 months to physiologically um, move through uh, something that's very significant that doesn't, it's not realizable, that doesn't work, and so on. So a little bit of space could be helpful practically. And also, of course, if you want to, you know, respect one another, respect one another's boundaries, if you guys get into new relationships and so on with other people. But back to the key point is the inseparability of an objective picture of a good match between the two people from a deep sense of um, wanting somebody romantically. I'm I'm not sure. I get a lot of questions about Ken Will, but I'm not sure what I can say about it at the moment. Maybe I'll think about it and come back to you later. I also don't know it enough. GS Poyd. I've had a chronic illness for 12 years, and recently my partner of 10 years betrayed me, cheated, built a new life outside ours, and I left her when I found out and she lied. How do I process this? As she was also a caregiver. This is devastating, and I'm very, very sorry. This happens a lot. Um, it can happen for different reasons. It can happen because something was wrong in the relationship. It can happen because the illness just grinds somebody down and they need oxygen. It can happen like that if they're perfectly mature, they just still need oxygen. It can happen if they're immature and they were only able to stay committed in fair weather conditions. Good relationships do last through poor weather conditions. But poor weather conditions can become overwhelming and suffocating too. Um, your question is going to be, and perhaps you've already answered it, is this now over? And if it is now over, what does it mean to explore forming a future partnership with somebody? Depends on how limited you are. If you're limited to the point that you can't leave your house, um, there are going to be very limited options. It could be just communicating with somebody online for a long time and then something happening in person. And then, of course, you may or may not have a care crisis. So, and that's obviously incredibly brutal to have these things mixed, right? And I mean, I understand. I broke my record the other day of being 8 days alone by myself, but I can't stand. I haven't stood in a year, not even for a quarter of a second. And I can't sustainably sit in the wheelchair. On a good day, I can sit in the wheelchair for half an hour plus. My record is sitting with a dear friend for 3 hours plus, a couple of months back. On bad days, I can do zero wheelchair or wheelchair for 10 minutes. So I deeply, deeply, deeply understand that you can have an unbelievable and shocking crisis of care. And moreover, then if you get carers in who are just strangers from some organization, private or government sponsored, then you can have all kinds of issues with them not understanding your needs, with them, giving you COVID and so on. So I'm very, very sorry about this. What none of this does, and I'm not speaking about you because I don't know your context. What none of this does mean is that it can't be the fault of the sick person that the relationship has broken down, right? People who really, really struggle, people who are really, really ill, very often um, have dysregulated nervous systems, take this out on their partners, take everything out on their partners too, right? So this is an abstract conversation. I have no idea how all of that applies to you. But this is brutal, the fact that it's a decade-long relationship. I'm very, very sorry. It's common. Um, um, I've I've witnessed it to happen to people, in my friendship group. Um, it's really, 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 really difficult, and it's going to take time to get through, and it's going to take whatever it takes to practically make sure you keep on surviving. What's the difference between recognizing a person as a whole and holding them as a whole? Recognizing, if you want to distinguish the two, which you don't have to, just about how you use words, but I'd suggest these are two different things. Yeah. So if I recognize you and you're my friend, let's say, let's not be romantic, um, then I can write a 10-page essay about who you are and it'll be really accurate. If I hold you, that means that if something good happens to you, I feel something in a very beautiful way in my chest. Darcy Woodbridge, hi Vlad, as someone who met their partner in high school and now is in their mid-30s, you're still babies. You're still babies. I feel a certain guilt that I robbed them of certain experiences as a young adult. Understand what an extraordinary adventure a life partnership is. Life partnership is not boring, it's an adventure. People change, people evolve. Um, from their 30s to their 40s to their 50s to their 60s, 70s, fingers crossed you're healthy. It's an amazing adventure. And there's a real romantic with a capital R, as in, you know, you're creating something in the world. There's real romantic exhilaration about a life partnership. Life partnership is not sort of stability and like a rock and or like a boring sack of potatoes that sort of works. Life partnership is about exploration, and it can be an absolutely exhilarating journey of many chapters from beginning to end. Don't underestimate how exciting and challenging that can be. Michael, I'm not sure I'm going to answer your Ken Wilber question. I might think about it and say something separate. If you're really keen, get in touch with Vlad at outlook.com. Drop me an email there a couple of times and eventually I'll answer. Drew, Vlad, 36-year-old male, wasted most of my 20s and 30s on addiction. Clean now for 2 years. Proud of you. But no longer in a similar state of life as old friends. Where to recommend making friends and meeting women? Look, the key block is going to have to be, it depends on where you are in the world, but the key block is going to have to be online dating. And the key thing will be that you are open about the journey you have been on, not too soon and not too late in the dating process. Because there's a risk you want to keep things back and you sound evasive. There's also a risk, it's the second sentence you say to somebody. So balance that well and be as transparent as possible, but knowing that the full story of that is probably something you have to do on date 3, not on date 1. And look, the best way to do it is look at all the dating apps that are meaningful in your part of the world, and get yourself up on the top 2 or 3 that sort of most naturally relate to you. But really take time, really take half a day or a day to write your profile. Make sure that it's the kind of profile that the person who knows you best in the world would say, yeah, that's 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 you, that's Drew, that's an authentic profile. um you know don't just sort of try to protect yourself by saying, hey, I like eating potato chips and I like going to the cinema. Don't hide like that. And also be open about the extent to which you're exploring and you're not sure yet and so on. Deb says that the most important things in my relationship is supporting each other to learn and grow. Very beautiful. We hear about a lot of people giving up on relationships. Olisato is asking, has the opportunity cost of relationships become too high, or are we too easily distracted? The more privileged amongst us have a greater expectation than any humans living in any culture in the past that more of our wishes should be realized. And that can square poorly with the fact that a partner is not there to meet all of your needs. A partner is there to meet some of your needs, and then the rest of your needs are going to be met in different ways elsewhere. I also think that the distorted aspects of our authenticity culture is in principle a good thing, but it's very me, and distorted for us, means that people are not prepared to explore the extraordinary benefits that come with the work and the investment that relationships require. Um, and so that means that people are also going to have people are also going to be single at times in their life where they need the kind of support the relationship gives. We shouldn't overly romanticize this and say it'll all be fixed if these people got into relationships, because if we've got too many people in that predicament, they're going to be people who are sort of light and uh, s- you know l- less deeply involved in their relationships than people under different cultural circumstances. So just to say get into relationships is not an answer. But yes, this is part of the story of the um, deep individualism consequent to a distorted authenticity culture, and also the various kinds of untethering of social bonds in our society. KTI, my girlfriend is not comfortable with me making a phone call to a female friend who lives far away. Thoughts? It depends on that friendship, right? I am a very big fan of separating out actual dynamics, like sorry, dynamics is the wrong word. Actual social mise en place, like what is happening. Are you talking in the corridor? You're having coffee? You're having dinner? Let's say it's two heterosexual people, and there's a male and a female, um, versus what actually emotionally happens in that exchange. Right? You can have an inappropriate glance at somebody while walking down the corridor at work in a way that slightly betrays your relationship. At the same time, you can have a completely appropriate 4-hour one-on-one dinner with a female friend that is fully respectful of your partnership. So I'm not a big fan of designating this by um, behaviors. So coffee, yes, dinner, no. Lunch, yes, dinner, no. Conversation in the corridor, yes. Conversation in the cafeteria. I'm not a big fan of that. I think that something very tiny can be a betrayal behaviorally, and something very big can be perfectly safe. There is an argument against this, and that is that, especially with men more than women, um, it is a limited number of men who are perfectly capable of having deep platonic friendships with women. A lot of men are capable of that, but maybe not most. Um, and we've got to be aware of that. We've got to be realistic about that. And that's the pushback against what I have said. Um, in other words, I am not saying that it's okay for every person in every relationship, heterosexual relationship, to have dinners with members of the opposite sex. I'm saying that it will often be okay, but not necessarily for everyone, maybe not even for most. Um, But the way you define it, I would say, you define the boundaries there is not by the particular behavior, but by the emotional dynamic. Does that make sense? I think that's the key distinction. So if you've got something questionable, of some kind of questionable past with this person you're speaking on the phone to, that's going to be more of a problem for your girlfriend. Here is another question. Um, what would happen if by accident you recorded your conversation with this friend of yours you speak to on the phone and your girlfriend heard the recording? What what would she be shocked by anything there? Would she be hurt by anything there, right? And by the way, that also doesn't mean that um, the only boundary dynamics you have with members of the opposite sex are dynamics where your partner can walk in any minute and the conversation will continue exactly as it would have done before. No, not at all. Because it might be that that person you're on the phone with is your friend, but not friends with your partner. And so there might be, you know, uh, might find it challenging to share something personal with your partner because the partner's not their friend, but you're their friend. But it doesn't mean anything inappropriate is happening. Um, but nevertheless, it's an important question. What would your partner feel if she got a tape recording of that, of that conversation? Would there be anything that she feels betrays her? Um, so uh, all you need to do is have an open conversation about what boundaries you feel are appropriate here, boundaries you can agree on. Also, by the way, boundaries don't have to be symmetrical. It is completely possible that in the relationship, partner A feels very comfortable with their partner doing something, partner B feels less comfortable, and so behavior has to adjust for that a little bit. Then there is another way of looking at it. One thing you don't want to do is make your partner feel anxious or unsafe, even if you're not doing anything wrong, because it's on you if you've created conditions that make your partner feel anxious or unsafe, even if you haven't done anything wrong. Right. Okay, let's do 3 more minutes and take a couple of more questions and then see. Alex, your question about the relationship between family structures and the material conditions in our dating culture is maybe too much requiring of sociological generalization and actual data than I can come up with on the spot. I've seen a couple of relationships try and transition from monogamy to polyamory and fail. I felt they were grasping at straws. What would you make of polyamory? So, um, polyamory is huge in our culture, and it's a very big part of the crisis of men, because one way the crisis of men expresses itself is through people becoming fans of Jordan Peterson, but the other way it expresses is through um, people becoming polyamorous, or going into putting right at the core of their identity, um, you know, particular ways of structuring their romantic life. What would I say about polyamory? I think sociologically, the people most suited to polyamory might, the people most psychologically capable of stably dealing with polyamory might be the people who want it the least. The person who would cope best with polyamory is the person who is very good at communication, very good at putting other people first without undermining themselves. somebody who is very mature when it comes to unhealthy forms of envy and very mature when it comes to healthy forms of envy. There are healthy forms of envy, envy that is more conducive to growth. So that's one thing I'd say. I think that, funnily enough, somebody like me would be very good at polyamory, even though I'm not interested in it at all. It's completely boring for me. And it's not fulfilling, and it lacks all of that excitement that a committed couple relationship has for me. So that's an important sociological remark. The second bit is, how far are these types of relationships asking of people something that they can't actually give realistically? In other words, is there a problem there whereby an argument is made that something is only the way it is because it's a cultural norm that can be changed, when in fact it is a set of more basic psychological needs that polyamory disrupts? Now, then, a third point I would say is that polyamory is going to become a bigger part of our lives because of that diffusion of relationships. I think we're going to have more ambiguity in our relationships, not we personally, but I won't, but the culture will. We're going to have more ambiguity in our relationships. And we're also going to have, unfortunately, somebody might say fortunately, less involved couple relationships where both the two people are less in. Now, there's a lot more to say about polyamory. It's probably going to warrant a separate video. But if you allowed me just one remark, I'd stick with my first remark. Polyamory makes extraordinary demands on the people involved, on their maturity. And then I make the tongue-in-cheek sociological guess that people who have that kind of maturity are going to be less inclined to practice polyamory than the people who lack that kind of maturity. So there is something self-undermining in the practice. But are there some people who are absolutely stably and contentedly practicing it with some challenges? Yeah. Probably on that, Esther Perel will be better than me, or at least certainly better than what I've just given you. Oh, we're rolling on a little bit. Okay, let's take a couple of more questions. It seems more difficult to meet new women organically nowadays, Toby is writing, and dating apps are utterly draining for me. Thoughts? Spend a day or two systematizing what the hell you're doing, I think. Right? Figure out if you're using the right app in the right way. Make sure your profile is top notch and professionalize it a little bit. So, right, put aside 1 hour, 2 hours a week where you're properly engaged in it. And it's not just, right? So, really exhaust the possibilities that an app offers for potential exploration, connection. And when you're not happy with that, then reflect. And then if you've really done that with all of the apps available to you, then you've got to explore organic opportunities offline. I do accept this. In other words, I do think that there are good and bad dating apps, and I do think that there are certain demographics that are sometimes really badly catered for by these apps. So it is possible that apps are not serving you well, but you got to systematize your use of them before you confidently say that's the case. And also, there's serendipity there. You've got to put in time, right? It might be nothing, 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 and then something suddenly. My biggest problem is that I worry my interest would make other people uncomfortable and creep out too much. Mushroom is saying, You've got to understand that this is a give and take dance. And so you've got to give something um, that is going to be special for other people to receive. And if you don't know what that is, you've got to explore that. Okay, I'm scrolling fast. Down, down, down. Seeing if there are questions. Oh God, Dr. Tough Guy. Any principles for flirting with colleagues in a professional context? I'd be very, very, very careful about uh, uh, sexualization of dynamics at work. It rarely works out well. So my approach is, if you've seriously convinced yourself you've met your life partner at work, go for it. Otherwise, keep it really boundaried. What is possible on the side, however, is a kind of benign flirting where there's no sort of genuine interest in one another. It's just a little bit of play. That can be okay, but it can't become anything that is disrespectful of uh, everybody's relationships, or disrespectful of their um, hypothetical relationships, disrespectful of their, the respect they're entitled to as single people. So I'd be, unless you're talking about flirting in that loosest sense, um, you know, uh, where you're just basically saying something positive to boost somebody, or just exchanging a playful glance, that can be okay. But I'd be very, very careful. I'm not a big fan of um, making professional dynamics murky unless you absolutely have to, and you've met your life partner at work, and it's going to be awkward, but it's just going to have to be the way it is then. Thoughts on long distance relationships? Long distance relationships work if they are if they have the ingredients for a life partnership. If they don't have the ingredients for a life partnership, they tend to begin fragmenting. Um, Investment in long-term relationships needs to be uh, a bit more systematic and less organic, perhaps, right? Um, so you've got to make sure you use sort of clock up a certain number of hours of proper intimate connection. It's more possible now with all the technology we have, but you also have to have a clear and agreed on strategy for how and when you meet in person. You've got to be on the same page about that, and you've got to have a sense of also working toward being together in the future, or at least a sense of when you will and how you will begin working toward being physically together in the future. Is the breakdown of families reversible and specific to current circumstances, or is there a more permanent shift with stable marriages between biological parents becoming increasingly rare in the future? Um, the trend is bad, and it's part of the social forces that are driving our society. So some of this is not to do with sort of the cultural trend of people making particular decisions. The social forces driving this to some extent, some of the same social forces that are undermining our democracies. But it's not um, irrelevant to this, that we have also things that are an intersection of social forces, in particular cultural crises, like the crisis of men. I mean, what are you going to see if you're in a really big city? What you're going to see a lot of as one of the patterns is women aged 30 to 40 separating from their partners, having had children, and then going on to have flourishing relationships, whereas the men don't. The men continue to struggle. You see that pattern quite a lot. So there is a lot going on there. The bits that are going on that are more cultural are easier to fix than the more structural bits to do with economic forces and tethering of social bonds. But the trouble is the two are interactive. So there is no sort of like conservative utopia whereby you wave a magic wand and then this pattern is interrupted. DJ, I missed your super chat. Okay, let's make sure I take all the super chats and then we might definitely wind down. DJ, my mind defaults to feeling shame and I have a low self esteem. How can a young guy without friends or a relationship learn or convince himself to care less about the opinion of others? I think some of what I said in response to the first question, let me just scroll all the way up, might be relevant. Pauli asked, and he's older than you, is asked, been single 2 decades, never became black pilled or depressed, but I believe my emotional state has atrophied. How do I cope with chronic loneliness? So wind back maybe to the first answer to some degree. But it's not about the opinions of others. It's about you learning to love yourself, DJ. And you being able to look inside yourself and accept what you see. Where the opinions of others come in is that others accepting you help you over time accept yourself. So that's important. Also, the opinions of others can mean all kinds of different things, right? Are you talking about parents with whom you have, a challenging dynamic? Well, that can be very, very difficult. Or are you talking about just your peers? Well, that's different because I think if you have a strong sense of yourself, you're not going to worry about what your peers think too much. So it's about you learning how to love yourself, dealing with whatever trauma you've inherited from childhood. That might mean therapy. And learning to accept yourself. This is about you giving yourself certain things, not about you becoming indifferent to things others don't give you. But it's impossible, right, for me to say something really helpful and meaningful at this abstract level. Okay, have I done all the super thanks? I think so. All right. I'm going to take one last question. And then we're going to wind up. Casually watching. So what do we do as women when men are continuing to struggle? How do we find a partner without settling? Okay. It's possible that you don't. This is a little bit about serendipity and luck. It's possible that you don't. but you have a very, very good chance to. The question is essentially, if there's a generation of men that's less together than generations of men in other cultural circumstances, and it's a generation of men that you would typically pair with, so there is less choice, what do you do? And the answer is you make certain kinds of compromises, but not others. And what that balance is a very personal question for you. And ultimately, it's about what will allow you to feel safe enough, what will allow you to feel seen enough, what will allow you to respect your partner enough. I'm assuming that you're together, which isn't necessarily the case, but I'm assuming that you're together and you're struggling to find matches. And then the question is, what level of need are you open to having to meet outside of the committed couple relationship via your friendship group, roughly? And then obviously the question of, depending on your age, the question of children comes into it, right? To what extent are you looking for a life partner? To what extent are you looking for a father to your children? And when it comes to this question of what one's prepared to compromise and what one's not, many women will compromise on certain qualities of their partner qua partner, as long as they have certain qualities qua father. But that's going to be the kind of dance you do. Thank you, beautiful community, for this chat about this very important part of our civilization. We'll do more. And I think one chat I'm going to do is specifically about platonic friendship, because that's a very, very important part of our culture. It's also especially a very important part of our culture in a moment of cultural and political turbulence. So beautiful community, thank you so much for being with me. We've been a smaller group, and so one of the things that's pleased me today is that I've been able to reach a greater proportion of questions. Lots of love, and talk to you very soon.